First and foremost, let's just start with the most recent last month with Major League Baseball recognizing the Negro Leagues and those records and those accomplishments. What did you think when you first heard that?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. Um, Honestly, when we got word of the potential of this and that folks were investigating it, there are a number of journalists who began to poke around and ask the question about it and what would have been the process for doing that. There have been historians who have been working on this for a number of years, but as the late summer went on, folks began to inquire of us and others about this. And honestly, I was a little surprised at first. We had already thought of the Negro Leagues as major leagues, so there was no need to debate the issue. It was more of semantics, if nothing else. But I can understand why people were so passionate about it. So my initial reaction was kind of meh initially, to be honest. But the movement got momentum, and then of course Major League Baseball took the consideration very seriously and made the move to elevate the Negro Leagues to Major League status. And I tell you, there's been an explosion of interest and emotion around this issue. Uh, and again, as I noted, a number of historians have been working on this issue for many years in terms of just trying to compile as much statistical record as they could. We know that there won't be ever a complete statistical record of the Negro Leagues because, one, because of segregation and racism, they weren't covered in the same way as Major League Baseball, and the records just didn't survive. So here at the museum, we focus on stories, we focus on human interest stories, we focus on the broader aspects of baseball as it relates to American and African American history. But I can tell you that the attention has been great. The attention has sparked a lot of great interest, not only among historians and journalists, but among baseball fans and family members who have taken a great deal of pride in knowing that their ancestors and their relatives are getting this extra status.
Is there a part of you too that's like, oh, it only took 100 years?
Well, we've been noting the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Negro National League this year, and I have to say, not to take credit for it, but the museum elevating the interest in history of African American baseball is in part uh, a catalyst for at least some of this interest. The Baseball Museum does have a great relationship with Major League Baseball, a growing relationship with Major League Baseball. And I think they've come to recognize the significance of recognizing and remembering the Negro Leagues. We know individual teams have, and now Major League Baseball as a whole. And I want to give a great deal of credit to the Baseball Players Association as well, the Players Association, for also driving this interest home as well. So as our president, Bob Kendrick, says, is never the wrong time to do the right thing. So they've done the right thing, and a lot of people are very appreciative of it. Some are concerned about what it might do in terms of perhaps watering down the history of the Negro Leagues, but we don't think of it that way.
What can it do for names and for record books and just getting maybe more of these names in people's mouths and at their homes that they can learn of this history and also remember the excellence, whether it was in the Negro Leagues or going up against Major League Baseball numbers?
I think that's the greatest point, is that there'll be folks who will now learn about baseball players who were contemporaries to important white baseball players, but who just happen to play in a different league. I do want to caution, though, that often over the years, the history of the Negro Leagues has often been compared in light of white baseball leagues. The Negro Leagues can stand on their own as far as what happened and the incidents that happened and the greatness that happened. And they need not have to be in the shadows of white baseball. They deserve to be talked about alongside white baseball in that respect. And it's going to be difficult not to make these comparisons, but in terms of understanding the context of what the Negro League players had to do, in some respects it was more heroic because they had to not only play as much as they could, as many games as they could, but against the backdrop of segregation and oppression, not being able to travel where they needed to go, not being able to make the same uh, level of money or have the same level of resources at white baseball players. So you had to love the game in order to compete when you know you couldn't play on an even playing ground. So you did it, you succeeded at it, and in essence, because you were so good, over time, you broke down barriers. And then some would say that those breaking down of barriers in sport also help break down the barriers in society.
Obviously, you in this work, you hearing these stories means much more to you than it ever will to me, being a white female. But I think for our times, what's so frustrating is none of this should have happened. Like it was so wrong. It's racist, it's segregation, it's not affording the opportunity to people just based on the color of their skin. And I think that's what's so complex about this issue. How do you toe that line and handle those emotions and just knowing that what they went through is not right? There's a lot of people, whether they were baseball players or not baseball players, that had to deal with this when our country was not right. Still isn't perfect today and right, but it's better.
It's an important point that in a perfect society, there would not have been a need for a Negro Leagues, but it did happen. And the former commissioner, Faye Vincent, had been credited as saying, thank God for the Negro Leagues in this sense, for those of us who love baseball, that the Negro Leagues was there to nurture great athletes who ultimately will become some of the greatest baseball players of all time. Can you imagine a Jackie Robinson playing football? Because he could. He did, and did it well, and played other sports well as basketball. But imagine him not being in baseball, or a Henry Aaron playing a different sport, or a Willie Mays playing a different sport. Baseball was there for them because black people love the game. And it's not that they didn't like Babe Ruth or Lou Gehrig either, but to have black fans in that respect. But to have black stars to be able to cheer on as well as a game to nurture their talent was very important. But of course, it all happened against the backdrop of racism and segregation. And I wouldn't underestimate the meaning of that for you and even your generation from the standpoint of studying our history, because it is still American history. It's something that we need to be more aware of. Everyone needs to be more aware of. And it's kind of a role that the Baseball Museum has played, especially over the last spring and summer with the social unrest. We have the content to at least explain parts of African American history and some of the things that people had to go through in order to become more American, for lack of a better term. And sports, we have found, is for lack of a better term, a safe entree into discussing those issues. We all tend to, no matter what our political or social persuasions are, we like to root for our sports teams in our communities, or to learn more about sports in our communities. And so this is a way of getting at those topics, but it's still American history is not watered down, no matter how romantic we think baseball is. We want to tell the truth about what these players went through and the backdrop in which they had to compete. And hopefully folks will have a greater appreciation for what they went through and what the community went through in order to nurture this game, in order to nurture their communities, and ultimately be able to break down doors in society.
They were playing baseball, black and white people, far before the 1900s, and then Jim Crow kind of changed everything and made things separate. Can you kind of just run through the breakdown of how everything came to be, and then tying in Jackie Robinson and unfortunately how his popularity was amazing and changed the game? It also was the start to the end of the Negro Leagues, just from an economic standpoint.
So African Americans had been witnessing the various forms of baseball, ball and stick games going back to slavery. As you get into a point where the actual game of baseball is being developed, African Americans were really present at the beginning, learning the game, understanding the game, excelling at the game. In the late 1800s, you had a handful of African Americans who were playing on white teams. Some, in the case of a player named Bill White, playing in Providence, Rhode Island, passed as white. He was very fair skinned, so he didn't play as a black man, but he was among the first blacks to play what you might call Major League Baseball. And later on, though, you have players like Moses Walker and Bud Fowler, who were black men who couldn't hide their race, but played on all-white teams. And they went through a number of different trials and tribulations because of their skin, but they were so talented that they could often get jobs playing for white teams. But by 1900, the different racial attitudes and animus would push black players out of the top levels of the game. There was never a written rule that said that they couldn't play, just basically collusion that kept them out. What historians have described as the so-called gentleman's agreement among team owners and team leaders not to recruit black players. So from about roughly late 1800s to 1900s, all the way to 1945, 46, we have no African American players in the so-called major leagues. You might see a Latino player, maybe a fair-skinned Latino player or someone coming through to play on these teams, but never a dark-skinned Latino or African American player. And this is World War II comes along, and African Americans are fighting valiantly in the war, making all kinds of contributions to society, still not getting treated fairly in many aspects of society, but especially with baseball. And there's a push from the media, the black media, and the left media, particularly the communist media, to make this a labor issue as well. And it's in this mix that Jackie Robinson emerges, Army veteran, multi-sport athlete from California, born in Georgia. The family moves to California, part of the Great Migration. And his talent rises and is noticed by the Brooklyn Dodgers as he needed a job to play baseball, decided to play baseball, and joined the Kansas City Monarchs and had a pretty outstanding season in 1945. And he was recruited primarily by the Dodgers for financial reasons, wanting to try to improve the team and spark attendance and make some money, including black fan money, but also a little bit of altruism from their general manager, Branch Rickey, as well. So it all kind of came together in late 1945, where he signed a minor league contract, played a minor league season in 1946, and then in April 1947 becomes the first African American since those players in the 1900s to make it to the major leagues. It still takes from that period, 1947 to 1959, before every white major league team at that time, which is roughly 16, to have at least one black or Afro-Latino player on their rosters. 12 years for full integration to happen.
Like you quoted earlier, it's never too late to kind of right the wrongs, even if generations have gone by and it wasn't their decisions that made it, goes into that. But is it a shame that these men, I mean, a lot of them, they're dead. You know, they're not getting to see their names in the Hall of Fame. They're not getting to see that slowly but surely the validation. Is that kind of tragic in our history that took so long and that we're still not 100% there?
I wouldn't go as far as saying tragic. It certainly is unfortunate, but I think because we have been around many of these players over the years. We've had players reunions. I've done oral histories with them. Each of them, to a man and a woman, there were women involved as well. They're very proud of their participation in the Negro Leagues. They've taken great pride in what they accomplished. They didn't feel like they needed any validation from anyone as far as they were concerned. And some played for the money, some played for the thrill of it. But in spite of all obstacles, they enjoyed what they did. Haven't talked to any player who said that they didn't enjoy the experiences that they had or trade the experiences that they had in spite of everything that happened to them. And so I think a lot of them have gone to their grave proud of their contributions to America, and it is up to us, their family members and others who try to preserve their memories, to continue the legacy of telling their story. And this is just one other way for us to tell that story.
We cover the Orioles, and Adam Jones is no longer here, but he was, vocal about the way baseball looks. It still doesn't look like him. What would you like to see, or what kind of changes need to happen to get the youth interested in the sport across all aspects?
Well, we get asked this question all the time, and I have a different view than most, although, and I'm a baseball fan, and I certainly would love to see more people of color playing the game. in the last decade or so, the percentages have been ranging around between 7 and 10% of American-born blacks playing the game. And so that number is growing slightly and slightly because of the efforts that people like MLB have been putting into the urban youth academies in different places that nurture baseball players. I love baseball. I think it's the greatest game. And I think for young people, it's something that they can learn many life lessons from, even more so than the other sports. And I think for me personally, it's more entertaining than the other sports. But at the same time, uh, the key for me is that there should not be any obstacles in the way of any young people who want to experience baseball. And if there are obstacles, then that's a problem that we have to clear up. We want them to at least experience baseball, even if they go to play other sports and things like that. And if baseball can give you an opportunity, for example, to earn an education or pay for an education, then maybe it would be great for you to be a professional, but I'd rather see more doctors, lawyers, and teachers. And baseball maybe can be a pathway to getting you there.
I can't let you go without asking about Leon Day and the legacy and the footprint that he put on the Negro Leagues. And it was he found out he was getting into the Hall of Fame, but it was unfortunate that he was ill and died a few days later. What's his name and what's his lasting impact?
Well, Leon Day is one of the greatest pitchers in Negro Leagues history, often thought of by his contemporaries as a gentleman and a leader. He played on some very important teams in the Negro Leagues, and ultimately, because of his legacy, had a lasting impact on the community in Baltimore, especially. Um, he is honored with one of the statues that we have in our field of legends as a great Hall of Famer, and someone who I know at the time fans dearly missed with his passing. Um, just an all-around great player. My understanding, he was an all-around great person and someone that a lot of young people should look up to.